Good to see all of you. Um, we're going to be talking about writing effectively. I'm Adam Bloom. I've worked with many of you in different roles at TNC, social media, media relations, currently on the global digital team working on writing, and I'm joined by my co-professor, Lindsay Mineo, our SEO specialist. So,
Hi, everybody.
all right, I guess we can just get started then. All right. So, everyone can see my screen okay? Great.
Yep.
All right. So, writing effectively for online audiences, we're going to start with some disclaimers. I thought that it was one of the smarter things that the genie did was to say what he could and couldn't do. So I thought I'd copy that. I'm not here to tell you this is the one way to write. I wish everything were so black and white that there were rules and this is good writing, this is how you shouldn't be writing. Writing involves a lot of judgment calls, and even when we have rules of grammar and style, there's always going to be more than one way to communicate an idea, to write a sentence, and your gut instinct is important here. So some of what you'll see in the following presentation, I actually I got some of this from this editor for the Wall Street Journal and a few other financial outlets, Shani Raja. This was a LinkedIn learning course, so anyone can take it. But he had some really good things to say. And one was that, writing is an art, not a science. So we are constantly blending and figuring it all out. Writing is also subjective. Like I said, you like one style, I like another. And as far as even using metrics for our site, like what metrics define good writing, it can get really difficult really fast because we've got engaged time for a page, but that doesn't just involve writing. That could involve watching videos. It could involve any other kind of multimedia on the page. There's how far down on a page does someone scroll, but it can be hard to isolate one metric that really tells you all about writing. So part of it is going to be about gut. More disclaimers. We're talking about online writing. So we're really looking to show you how we can make your content shine. And, there's a lot of different kinds of online writing. So there's full length features. There's thought leadership articles where your job is to kind of get across TNC's authority and try to influence conservation, oftentimes through an executive byline, sometimes ghostwritten by some of our fellow communicators. Informational articles where oftentimes this is how we get people onto the site from search engines, is because they're looking for specific information. We do some storytelling. We also do transactional pages. So we're not going to get into all the nuances for all of these. This isn't going to be a total storytelling course. But my goal is to just, like I said, help with how you communicate online. And that you'll see tools here, you won't see a lot of rules. So before you draft, this is the time to really think about what you're going to write. Sometimes we are in a swirl where we are being asked to write something. We have a lot of deadlines and it's just like, just go. But there's a point early on where you're doing a lot of deciding. What is the intent of the piece? And we have a lot of different kinds of intentions that we could do on our pages. It could be to inform, it could be to entertain, it could be to persuade. And it probably will be a little bit of a few of those, but you really should be thinking about what is the primary intention here, because that will help you decide on what your tone looks like, how long it's going to be, all of those elements. So let's talk about the audience for just a second. Who are you going to spend your time writing for? It could be a more general audience. It could be a very specific, smaller audience of, you know, water managers in a state out west. Um, Knowing who you're actually writing for is really going to help you with everything related to tone. So one quick thought is to, you know, avoid sounding authoritative for the sake of sounding authoritative. Like avoid pretentiousness. Oftentimes we've learned to seem really buttoned up. That can be okay in some situations, but we should be writing what we mean to say. So if you are writing something and it is very specifically for CEOs, or it's for particular executives who are working on the climate crisis, you may want to really button up your style. That's okay. But if your intention is to reach a lot of other people, just be clear that, you know, by writing something in a lighter style, you'll still be bringing everyone else along. It just doesn't go the other way around, where if you were to write something really authoritative, you might lose people along the way. So one thing to remember, your aim is to communicate brilliantly, not to impress. Quick note on writer's block. I think a lot of us run into this at times. Don't be too obsessed with perfection. We want to write the best articles and pages we can. We also do have limited time. So writer's block can actually be an advantage for you. And that link will bring you to a few ways it can help you organize what you want to write. But, you know, writer's block often comes down to not actually knowing what you're writing because things are a little fuzzy with why you're being asked to write something. It's not clear who you're going to write it for, or we're just tensed up about making it perfect. Just know that a first draft is a first draft. Let the ideas come out raw and we can craft them later. And that we deal with a lot of complex topics here at TNC. And when we're explaining it, you know, the way we think, you know, when we first get that first draft out there, there may be some extra fat in there, and that we can trim that later. Another thought, and this may resonate with you, it may not, about editing here at TNC, but as a writer here at TNC, you may hit the notes you wanted to hit in your draft, and then you bring it to a subject matter expert, a scientist, someone in policy, maybe legal, and they replace your writing with their preferred language. Now, we're not like an external outlet. We are here to support our science staff, and we need to preserve scientific integrity. We need to be careful about the sensitivity of political, legal, or cultural matters. But we also need to be able to say something and communicate it well. So I would say that, you know, just build trust with the people who are editing your piece. If it's only science staff that are editing it, they're going to be going in with the mindset of their science world, and basically this page is going to be reaching a lot more people than that. So have a non-subject matter expert copy edit. Another word for a non-subject matter expert would be another writer. So find someone else to just give it a look. And, you know, you want to have a good relationship with our scientists and policy staff. They're experts in their field. You're expert in your field. So just be comfortable explaining your rationale that you want to make their really important topics make sense to the general public. So we're going to be talking about a few different kinds of writing. So these four are specifically actually the four that Shani Raja, the Wall Street Journal editor, had identified. And we're not going to go through all of them, We're going to focus on simplicity and clarity today. But, you know, just by reading through these, you can probably get a sense of how they're all elements to writing. And, you know, we want to make our writing punchy. We want to do the most with the least amount of words. We also want it to be clear. We also want it to be elegant and flow. And we want it to be stimulating. So if you go all in on simplicity, it might not be very evocative. If you go all in on elegance, it may actually not be that clear. So it's all going to be a balance, like you said, about mixing ingredients. So let's talk some simplicity. This quote is, I could end the presentation here, and this would be the main point I want to get across. Stick to what the reader needs to know, not what you need to tell. We all have a lot of pressure to tell the entire story of conservation at all times. And we want to, but there's a lot there. And our audience can't handle everything every time when we throw it all at them. So we really need to think from the audience's side. That's, you know, when the new nature.org, the not so new nature.org anymore, you know, when that was established, we were really thinking of it from a content first, audience first perspective. So we're not putting things up just so it has a presence and it makes our staff and our, you know, executive directors happy. We're doing it for our audience. So a lot of this is, you know, about keeping things simple. We don't want our content to feel like homework. And you might have seen this slide from a GDU in spring. But getting to that idea of tone, you know, we don't need to have long dependent clauses. We don't need to have jargon words in order to seem like we're smart. In fact, by breaking things down, we can actually show and not tell that we actually know what we're talking about. And we love writers who make it as easy as possible to get lost in stories. So J.K. Rowling, yes, she writes, you know, you could call it a children's book series, but I would argue that they're actually getting to really serious subjects. And she does it in a way that can be very light. And you don't feel like she's taking you down she keeps you in the experience. And that's what it's all about. When I think of, you know, we sometimes throw out the word wonky here, like, oh, well, that's a wonky subject. And I think oftentimes that's almost like a way of justifying that topics are just complicated because they are. And I would argue that if a topic is worthy of explaining, we can find the time to make it make sense for people, and that no topic is just wonky and untouchable. So it's often about getting the right amount of information out there. So the reason we're talking about like too much information or keeping things light is because when things get slow and heavy for the reader, we often will lose them. This is definitely something we see online. Be acutely sensitive of the audience interest level. Where is the cutoff of too much information? When is your point adequately made? So here's an example from the wild. I'm just going to read through it, and you can get a sense of what, you know, when the point is made. The Nature Conservancy helped develop and advocate for the Water Fund, which includes tens of millions of dollars for nature-based programs, such as creating wetlands and restoring floodplains to naturally filter out the nutrients and sediments that contribute to harmful algal blooms. So there's a lot going on here. I would actually argue that overall, it's not that complicated of a sentence. Like I got where it was going, but it is like a paragraph as a sentence. And there may be things here that could move into another sentence. So what is most important here? Is it the water fund and the amount of money that's going to nature-based programs? Is it the actual conservation processes where we're actually benefiting the ecosystem and helping people and nature? It's not perfectly clear here, but the solution is often simple. We can remove some details and shift them to a new sentence. So, like I said, this is not a bad sentence. It's just a sentence where we have a lot of information and we could be making it easier to understand and also more effective and forceful if we move some of it to another sentence. So let's go through an example. In the project, TNC is supported by project partners, including 2 natural resource districts in the region, will collaborate with farmers across the state in the adoption of soil health practices, cover crops, reduced tillage, and diversified crop rotations on an estimated 100,000 acres over 5 years. So this was the first sentence in a section, all about a new project in the state. So what's most important here? And this is an actual question because I did not write it. I don't know whether the most important part here was that the partners were 2 natural resource districts. If that was the case, then we can work the sentence around that, like it sort of like it is here. But if the most important thing here is that this is a project that's going to be impacting conservation on 100,000 acres, and there are 3 really important soil health practices, then that would probably be a place to start, given that we spend around 16 words just talking about the partnership. So another version, in the project, TNC will collaborate with farmers across the state to adopt better soil health practices, like cover crops, reduced tillage, and diversified crop rotations on an estimated 100,000 acres. In the second sentence, multiple partners, including 2 natural resource districts in the region, are supporting the 5-year project. In this case, we just didn't throw it all in one sentence. We split it up. And, you could even boil it down more. Like if we got our answer on like, is the natural resource district essential to the section? Yes, I would keep it in. If no, I may just mention the 5-year project and make it one sentence again. So a lot of different ways we can do this. So why does speed matter so much? I'm going to pass it on to Professor Mineo to go through why that might be.
Thanks. So some of you might have seen this before too, because we are definitely communicating this as many ways as we possibly can. But the gist is that people don't read, they scan. And we all definitely want to believe that our audience is different. Our audience definitely reads. They talk to us about how much they read. They reach out on social media or email or call us, and they donate because of specific articles that we've written. But most people still scan. This study was done in 2006, and then it was redone last year. Nothing's changed. People are scanning instead of reading. And they're scanning because it can deliver almost the same amount of information as reading, but it takes less time and less effort. So people are getting the information they need and they want, but they're not reading word for word, as much as it pains the writer and all of us to know that it is unfortunately the truth. So eye patterns follow certain patterns. You can see on this screenshot here, they call this an F pattern, where the eyes follow from top to bottom, and then they'll scan over from left to right. And they're looking for headers and subheaders, bullet points, larger font, colors, links, really anything that's going to stand out, and they're going to linger there a little bit longer. So you can see those bright red spots where people are spending more time on those sections than they are on the rest of the words of the page. And that's just because they're scanning through really quickly. And then the reasons people scan, these are all reasons that we have absolutely no control over. So we don't know what their motivation is. Why are they reading this article? How important is this information to them in that moment? What are they looking to do with your article? Are they looking for just one quick specific fact, and as soon as they get that answer, they're going to bounce? Or are they just browsing and kind of just scrolling on their phone? Speaking of, how focused are they? Do they have, we're all working from home now, so how long are they ignoring their work or their kids or their pets or their TV or any of the other million things that people have to distract them? And then just a personal trait too, like, do they usually scan or do they usually read word for word? I usually read something word for word, but I can talk to probably 100 other people who would all say, no, I normally just scan. And even I'll just scan an article sometimes. So we want to make it easy for people to get the information they want when they're scanning and not force them to read word for word every time. And then another really important piece of the simplicity component here is reading on phone. So again, we're all working from home. We've got our phones with us probably more often than we did before. And you can see these are screenshots of some of our articles that are well written, but how they look on a mobile device. And so if you're going to be promoting your articles on social media, or you're going to be promoting them in an email, or they are searching from, the couch, and maybe they just didn't want to bring their computer, or they're out and about somewhere, or like, I think it's 30%, something like that, of the world only uses a smartphone. And a lot of us choose to only use a smartphone when we're not actively at work. So these are all ways that people will only read your articles on mobile. And that just makes it so much more important to be, for simplicity to come through in your articles, to not make them do so much extra work.
Thank you, Professor. And, just so looking at, we put these articles into mobile view in this screenshot, and basically, if you're scrolling on your phone, there's going to be multiple times when all you see is text, and that even as you keep scrolling, you still only see text. And, that's not to say that, people don't read at all. Like, we often read novels, not just picture books, but when you're reading on your phone, there's so much going on, like Lindsay was saying, and attention spans are going to be lower, and you're not anchored as much if you don't really know how much further you need to read. Like, a lot of online reading is about cues, and like my example would be, like, if you were swimming and you couldn't see the bottom of whatever body of water you're in. Sorry to evoke nightmares, but like, it's that idea of, I don't really know how much longer I'm supposed to go. So cues throughout the page help people know, okay, this is how much time I will spend on this. So moving on to just more ways to make your writing clear. And just everything here is kind of ways to keep people on the page and engaged with our work. The reason we work on clarity is because fuzzy ideas will turn the readers off. So I know this is a very clear slide. From talking about communication to providing guidance, this slide intends to play a part in the education of its readers. I often will see sentences across nature.org that are kind of set up like this. And it's like, okay, well, I probably have to read that over again to know what the slide is about. When the meaning is not hitting instantly, the communication is falling short. We want to avoid making the reader go back and reread a sentence because it takes them out. Like, we don't want them to even realize that they're reading. And sometimes we ask the reader to uncoil our sentences for us. Like, we have an idea, it's a little complicated. We just throw it to the reader and hope that they'll take it from there. And like I mentioned, like, that can take them out of the reader experience, and they may drop out. So let's go through an example of something that could have more clarity. This is a real example, and I'll say this is from a page on nature.org. It's probably not from a page that's going to get a huge general audience. It's about a partnership for corporations to increase their sustainability practices. So not for just anybody, but I think this concept still applies. So I'll read through this. Moving from strategy to action requires businesses to understand and apply conservation research. And this not only entails tools that are accessible to a variety of skill sets and levels of decision makers within a company, but also adopting them into the culture. And scientists need to work with companies to learn to translate ecosystem science into metrics and tools that are both credible and can be readily used in the business context. So first time reading that, I would say you might get some of it, but you're probably going to need to go back. So just reading the first part of the first sentence again, moving from strategy to action requires businesses to understand and apply conservation research. And this, blankety, blankety, blank. I'm not really sure what the this is in this case. Is it the shift from strategy to action at the way beginning? Is it the ability to understand and apply conservation research? It's not perfectly clear. So I'm left with not knowing what the idea was trying to communicate. And then later on, what is the them in the, I think it's in the second sentence. Where's them?
End of the first.
Oh, still in the first. Okay. See, I'm already getting lost in here. So are we talking tools? Are we talking skill sets? And then other parts of this, towards the end, there's a part that mentions metrics and tools that are both credible and can be readily used. So this is just a small example of like, that's just a clause that can be a little clunky, and we can find another way to work on that. So it's not always that everything needs to be written. Sometimes it's these clauses that we are putting in there to cover all our grounds are just a little confusing. So if the reader can stumble through this, it's something that probably should be rewritten. So here's just another version. In order to move from strategy to action, businesses must understand conservation research and be able to actually apply it. Companies should adopt conservation tools into their cultures and make them accessible to staff across different skill sets and levels of leadership. At the same time, scientists must ensure these ecosystem science tools are credible and ready to be used in business context. So this is my version of it. Could I have refined even more? Absolutely. But my main thing here wasn't to just delete ideas. It was to just smooth them over a little bit. So another thing I see often in articles on nature.org is a missing link. So we deal with some pretty complex topics here. So much of our work is about climate change, and climate change involves multiple types of, there are many things that lead to climate change. There are many impacts of climate change, and it's not always, so perfectly clear that A leads to B, which leads to C. So oftentimes we ask the reader to supply the connection, and I'll give you some examples. Oftentimes when we talk about water funds, we kind of assume that people know we're talking about cleaner water. Or if we're talking about reforestation or just conserving forest, it's looked at as a climate solution. Now, for some of our audiences, we can assume that they can make this connection. Like if we were writing about how trees are a climate solution, and it was for people at the the UN, the IPCC UN climate body, they can probably make that connection that trees can be a climate solution. But for a lot of people across nature.org, it's not going to be, there's a link that's missing. So what could these links be? For water funds, the idea that we're protecting the source of water, we're protecting the watershed, we're protecting the place where the water flows from. There are pollutants through parking lots and farms that can make it their way into the water supply, and that by conserving, we are going to make water cleaner. So there's a connection there that's just missing. Between trees and climate, trees store the carbon, store greenhouse gases. They remove them from the air. We may assume like, yeah, we all know that, but we don't all know that. So it's just an easy thing to put in there, and I don't think you're going to throw off your audience by saying that. I don't think someone will read this and be like, well, I already knew that, and just leave. So just one example. I actually wrote the original version a couple of years ago for an article. Industries that work with and on the land, in particular forestry and agriculture, have a huge opportunity to step up, to transform working lands and help them move from being carbon emitters to places that capture and store more carbon than they emit. So I found recently when I reread it that there was a missing link here. I'm talking a lot about a huge opportunity to emit less carbon, and that it starts with industries that work with the land. But I don't really make that connection clear. I mentioned vaguely like transforming working lands, but transform working lands is something that, because I've been working at TNC, I know exactly what that means. But our reader may not know exactly what this opportunity is. The missing link here was that we can better manage that land so that can store more carbon. It seems like really obvious when we put it in to an exercise like this, that, oh yeah, we're talking about managing land. But our reader isn't necessarily going to make that connection. So a new version of this, industries that work with the land, like forestry and agriculture, have some of the greatest opportunities to lower carbon emissions. By managing their timber forests and farms in ways that more effectively store carbon, these industries can capture more of the gas than they emit. So just another version of writing it. Okay, well, good job, everybody. We made it through English class. I know we've got really talented writers here, so we're not going to just get into like how to write a sentence anymore. We're going to talk about how to make that sentence shine online. And for that, we go back to Professor Mineo.
Thank you, Professor Bloom. All right, so we're going to talk about writing great page titles. And what we talked about so far was, making sure people are present when they're reading your articles. And now we're going to make sure people can find your articles so they can read them. And that starts with a clear page title. So your page title has two jobs. The first is to accurately describe the topic or purpose of the page. And you want to do this so that any reader can understand what your page is about without any other context. So that includes your image and your subtitle. And then the second job is to get clicks. So it should be intriguing enough that people, when they see it, they want to click and read your article. Because again, we're talking about online audiences. So if you remove everything else from the page except for the page title and give that a read, what does that page title say about your article? If you're reading that, would you click on it? Is that interesting enough? Does it communicate enough to you? And then if you think yes, maybe bring in someone else who hasn't worked on your page and ask them to read just the page title, not the subtitle, not look at the image, not your first sentence, just the page title. And then ask them, what is this page about? And then if they're right, you probably did a really good job writing that page title. But if they get it wrong or they're not really sure, you might need to add a little bit more context. And we get a lot of, well, what if I want to be creative with my page title? And creativity absolutely has a place, but we want to discourage creativity at the expense of clarity. So you still want to have a really clear, informative page title. And your title should never be more interesting than the story you're trying to tell, but it should be a promise of an interesting story to come. Your page title also should use words that inspire that action and use emotional words. You want to get their attention and you want to get them to click on your article. You can use this or do this through vivid verbs, using numbers and symbols. Money is a great thing to talk about in your page title if your article is about that. And then also try, this one seems a little bit more obvious, but avoid jargon and acronyms in your page title, unless the acronym is something just overwhelmingly obvious. Like if you're talking about NASA, people will know what NASA is. And then when you're reading or writing your page title, think about what your personal experience is. Unless you were just assigned this article to write about, and you have no real knowledge or involvement in it at all. What made you interested in this story and what's your real hook? Like you can look at that and other people will probably feel the same way as you. So like put that right in your page title, like get to the really interesting part. So we had some examples of not so great page titles. And so here are some examples of some great page titles. So you can see the thing they have in common is they're all a little bit longer than some of the ones on the previous slide. We also see two different tools here. So two of them use a colon. So you have that kind of catchy title portion right at the beginning. So recovering from wildfire and then urban green jobs, like these are, a little bit more maybe clever, they're a little bit more intriguing, but then you get into kind of the more meat of what the article is about. So using drones to plant trees and then building skills. And this is about, job building and a workforce program in a specific area. You also have a page title that's a question, like it asks what I think is a very intriguing question. What happens if we don't protect the high seas? Like, I don't know, but it sounds bad. So I kind of curious and I want to read that. And the article does a good job of going into detail, like here's what the problem is and here's, what the potential threat is. So I think that these do a good job of being a little bit creative, but also accurately describing what this is about so that someone is going to be intrigued enough in order to click through and read it. We're just going to go through a few more examples. So these are examples of what this would look like if someone is searching in Google. So this is exactly how our pages appear to someone who is just searching around and maybe hasn't clicked a direct link from social media or email. So just looking at the page titles by themselves, like what is the power of place about? And that one's about clean energy in California. And it's just not immediately clear that that's what that's about. And then wine and water, I think is very interesting. Like I see it's from the Nature Conservancy and it's talking about wine and water. I love wine, sounds great. But when I click on it, it's actually about river conservation. So to me, like maybe a little bit less less interesting. I don't live in Arizona, so apologies to anyone from that area. And then the Restore Act Progress article as well. Like I'm not from the Gulf of Mexico. Wasn't immediately clear to me. Is this about progress on the Restore Act? Yes, it actually is. But that title to me was a little bit confusing. I wasn't immediately sure what does that mean without clicking on it. We'll go through another set of examples. These ones I think are very clear. And the first one is a newsroom article. So it's not going to be, maybe the most creative page title out there, but it is very clear. The Great American Outdoors Act introduced says exactly what you're going to get. Kentucky birds, again, exactly what you're going to get. This is about birds in Kentucky. And then 8 ways to reduce waste, which we've been seeing pop up quite a bit the last 2 months, is just simple how to reduce waste. So yeah, your page title really should it should tell the reader exactly what they're going to get. Pass it back to you, Professor Bloom.
So we're just going to go through a few more elements for pages. And this will cover just how to get some of the structure and rhythm down, but also to just keep online readers engaged with these pages. So intro pages, I think this is where if I have writer's block, it's often like on the intro page. So I'm just going to include a few examples here, and I'm not really assigning like a value. I'm just kind of staying neutral on these, just to give you an example of different ones out here. In response to climate change, land is key. Obviously there's going to be more context after that. It's the beginning of an article. To me, it's not perfectly clear what that means. Here's another example. Melting ice and rising sea levels are perhaps the most iconic impacts of climate change, but these and other changes happening in the ocean and cryosphere, the parts of the Earth's surface covered in ice, are more complex and much more severe than commonly recognized. I actually think this does a good, it's a bit long for a first sentence, but I think it actually is pretty clear and compelling. It mentions that there are impacts of climate change that are iconic that like most people would think of, but then there are other ones. And it throws out cryosphere, but it explains it. That's why I love this. You can include words that are like tough to find another word for. As long as you explain it, I think you bring the reader along. This story is about connections. It's okay. I want to learn more now. This is, going to be more of like a narrative story. Did you know that all the trees across New York City make up a forest? I find that interesting that one of the largest cities in the world is also a forest. So I'm going to read on that. Few experiences are more quintessentially Minnesotan than the scenic drive along Highway 61. Just another, there's obviously, this doesn't, if we think back to the four kind of elements of writing: simplicity, clarity, elegance, evocativeness. We've moved beyond simplicity and clarity now. We're like actually trying to make something that like flows. And so your intro can be really important way to do that. And then the world's population is growing fast. I feel like I could probably find this as the intro to a lot of articles across the site. It's trying to set something up, but it's also, I don't know if it says a whole lot. We all know the population is growing. This is some fodder for some writers with strong opinions. Just kind of going through serial comments for a second. This is just a like part of the style guide. Our official stance is that of the AP, which is avoid it whenever you can. But if you can't, if removing that comma before the end makes the meaning really unclear, then you should include it. So just a few examples really quickly. Panthers are impacted by genetic issues, reduction in available prey, and interspecies aggression. It's acceptable to have the comma here because without one, you might think that there's a reduction in interspecies aggression, which is not what this sentence is saying. Another simple solution would be to just switch interspecies aggression so it's the second thing. So, I mean, there are multiple ways to do things here. Earthworms break up hard soil, create tunnels that allow air and water to better penetrate, and bring important minerals to the soil. I think this is warranted because if you look at that second clause there, the create tunnels that allow air and water to better penetrate and bring minerals to the soil, like there's a place there where it could be confusing. Could you combine those two clauses there? In this case, like the comma helps separate two complex ideas. They are standing almost at the point where the borders of Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky meet. No comma needed. The three main ways to limit the carbon in our atmosphere are by curbing the forces that are emitting too much in the first place, being more efficient with what we use, and actively capturing and storing some of what is already out there. It's a heavy sentence, but the comma actually doesn't do anything in this case, so we shouldn't include it. Maybe we could rewrite the sentence, but it's just a note on that. So back to Lindsay.
Thank you, Adam. And we have a couple of questions coming in through the chat, but I think at least one of them should be answered at the end. So just
Okay.
a mental note to keep some time. So yes, answering questions. And this is, again, just part of, it's another tool that you have in order to make sure that, when people are coming to your articles and they're coming to your pages, that they're getting what it is that they came for. So a great formula for pretty much every page we have, because every single page on our site is answering a question, even if it's not an explicit question, is to start off with the answer. Like put that as soon as you possibly can, and then you can transition into the data or the details, why this answer is the way it is, and then follow up with some sub questions and related information so that you're keeping people engaged with your story. And we'll walk through a quick example. So this is an article that we wrote last year. It was a membership article, I believe, real versus fake Christmas trees, which is better for the environment. So we ask that question in the title. We answer it right away in the subtitle, actually, but you can see down, we also re-ask the question in a subheader, which is better, and then short answer, real. first sentence after we ask that question. So you're giving people what they searched for right away. If that's all they wanted is just a yes or no answer, then they can leave. But most people will probably want to understand, well, why is this the way it is? So that's when you can get into the data here and show why your answer is correct. Why are you the authority to answer this question? And so this example here, real trees are better for this reason, and then even more on that later. So you're kind of hinting at, we're gonna even give you more information. So if you're intrigued by this, keep reading. And then immediately after this, we get into some sub questions. So you're keeping the interested readers on the page. You're not going to keep the people who really just wanted, which one's better? I want a one-word answer, because they're going to bounce no matter what you do, no matter how well written or how engaging your article is. And again, it's just a reality that some people are like that online, just like a lot of people scan articles online. So the ones that are interested, these are the ones that you're writing for now. Why are real trees better than fake ones? These are the people who are going to keep scrolling. These are the people who are going to keep reading. These are the ones who are going to be engaged with your content and possibly even click through and see, well, what forests should I be getting my Christmas tree from or something? I don't know if that's talked about in this article, but it also, when you're answering these types of related questions, it allows your article to be discovered for a much greater variety of questions. So again, this was an article that is explicitly answering a question, but every single article that we have out there, every single page, in fact, is answering some sort of question. And that question can be rewritten 1,000 different ways, and often is, depending on the person who's doing a search. So by having a little bit more information that's related to your main topic, you can be discovered for all of those questions. Photo captions are another really great way to keep that engagement and continue to tell your story. And we wanted to include photo captions here, even though this is just about writing, this GDU, but photo captions are part of writing. And these people who are scanning, like, they're lingering. If you look at our mouse flow data, which is our heat map tracking tool, if you look at those screenshots, they are stopping and lingering on our photos. And we think it's not just that they're looking at our beautiful photos, but they're reading our captions. So they're looking at, why is this photo used? How is this photo being used to tell the story? And so a good photo caption should stand alone. You shouldn't need to have just read word for word everything in the preceding paragraphs in order to understand why that photo is used. It should just stand all by itself and contributes to their understanding. And this means that you should be writing your photo captions every single time you use a photo. So if you're pulling like this photo, for example, of the forest with the nice cloudy sky in the background, this could be on, any number of pages talking about forests or land conservation. Could be on Plantabillion, but it's on this real versus fake Christmas trees article. And the caption would be very different if we used this on an article about just forest conservation in general, or if this was on Plantabillion. So using these photo captions, all the same tools that we are recommending to keep simple, clear, engaging language in your photo captions and keep people lingering a little bit longer. And then hopefully the people who are scanning will read your photo captions, because they generally do. And then, well, actually, that was kind of interesting. Maybe I should read, a couple of paragraphs around this photo to get more in-depth understanding. All right, and subheaders. So this is another great tool that you have at your disposal to kind of break up the text. And this is great for the scanners, but it's also really great for the people who are reading word for word. Subheaders are a signal that the topic is changing just slightly, but they're also a way that you can help tell your story. So when you have your subheaders, these jump out at scanners, but they also jump out at readers. So scanners will be drawn back in when they see a well-written and an interesting subheader. But then the people who are reading word for word, they pay extra attention to these subheads, and that improves their own comprehension of the story you're trying to tell and what you're trying to communicate. They also are useful for advancing your story. So you can actually tell a story through just the subheads. And then if you add in excuse me, your photos and your photo captions, you shouldn't necessarily need all of the text in your article in order to tell the story. Like, people can get kind of the gist of it. Obviously not all the details and not all the answers, but they'll get the gist of what it is that you're trying to say through just the subheads and the other elements on your page. So they're really, really beneficial, especially when people are reading on mobile devices. Again, it just breaks up those long paragraphs and keeps them interested. So every section you have is further enticing them to keep scrolling down the page and keep reading, because it keeps getting good. And so for your subheads, the same principles that you're using for page titles apply here. So just accurately describe the section, inspire them to continue reading. Also, they should stand alone, just like your image captions should. They shouldn't necessarily need to rely on what you're going to talk about in order to communicate what that section is about. So this screenshot is from this piping plover mystery article, and I pulled out all of the subheads here. And so if you read through them, you can get a sense of what this article talks about. So it's got a nice intro on piping plovers in this, I can't remember, I think North Dakota maybe was the state that published this, but rare habitat. And then the students come in and they're studying hydrology and they're looking at that compared to nesting habitat. So, all right, now we've got our characters involved. And then the next subheader is surveying nests using drones. That's got some really cool imagery associated with it. Now these students are going back in the lab and they're putting all this information together and they're trying to understand what's going on. And then it ends with, why are plover nesting sites decreasing? Oh, so it must be that back in the lab, they found out that their nesting sites are just decreasing, and now they have to figure out why. So you can understand like the flow, and they're like chapters, basically chapter headings in an article. And we did get a question about length. And so subheads, and we'll go into more detail about that afterwards, but subheads are really, really helpful if you have a longer article.
All right, I'm going to breeze through so that we can answer a few questions. Just another tool is pull quotes. It's a great, really easy to use component across nature.org. And there's so many different ways you can use them. You can find a great quote that's actually spoken by a real person, or you can find just a really nice line that might pique someone's interest. So I would advise, to look through your story, and, don't just look for like, this is the boilerplate language that, our program might want us to include. You could include an important point. Like, for instance, like the first example you'll see there is from, it's from an article about climate migration. Many of the world's species are already on the move. That's like probably the most important part of that article. It's also really like interesting stat, and we talked about numbers and how people scan. So like that draws you in. That very much was the crux of an article. But for a lot of these that are stories, you may want to just include something that like almost teases something. If you place something, if you place a pull quote before it actually appears in the text, it's almost like a teaser, and you can do that a lot of times. Or you can do it afterwards. It's like if someone's scanning, there's a good chance they missed it in the actual body of the article. But by putting it in there, like, some of these children could be our governor, right? Or the tribe was ecstatic. For the first time in many years, they had Hazel. By putting it afterwards, you may get a scanner to be like, oh, okay, and return, kind of in the way that a photo does. And just a quick note on narrative stories. We know that when it comes to actually evoking emotion and getting people to act, like a good story is the best way to go. We're not just led by facts. We're led by, what's in our heart, and stories can take you to these places and can bring TNC's work to people really quickly. So just a note, like, it's okay to have longer articles. Like I'm definitely not out here to say all articles should be short, but just know that, you know, you will have a drop off in people on your page. They may be the least qualified of your readers to be reading that, or but it's readers are going to make a quick judgment on whether they should continue based on how long the page is. Um, so, like you said, like if it's a really good story, you shouldn't be writing it just from whether a few online people are going to head off, but it's something just to consider if you are writing a 3,000 or 5,000 word story for an online audience. Introducing a character, always a good call. And then find some tension. You know, there's a lot of times our conservation projects aren't set in, there's something there that uh, there's a point where maybe it's not going to happen or something like that. If you can introduce tension, it's always a good thing to keep the reader interested. All right, I know it's 1:57, but we have some great resources. I'll just really quickly breeze through them. Questions to ask. We've got some accessibility topics. This is a really interesting one. Do I create a new page or do I update an existing page? And we have some examples of pages that we think are well written, and some resources and style guide resources. So no, we don't have a lot of time. I have not been looking at the chat. Is there a question I should?
We have two questions that I would really like us to answer. So we've kind of hinted at it, and the first one is, what's the ideal length for online writing? I have a thought on that, but Adam, I wanted to let you answer that too.
Oh man. I'd actually like to hear yours, Professor Mineo.
So the folks at Google say that a page should be as long as it needs to be. If that page is a one-word answer to a question, then great. If that is all that's needed, then that's fine. It can be that short. I wouldn't recommend that, because it seems like you could probably add some more information there, or just include that one-word answer onto a related page. But you know, a 10,000 word article is also not too long. It's how long it needs to be to tell your story, answer the questions that you know, are important to answer. Like Adam was saying, though, if you're going to have an article that's really long, and we're talking like thousands of words, then not everyone is going to read through that entire thing, and probably a lot of people are going to not read that entire thing. But some people will, and those are your really dedicated readers. So that it kind of comes down to a business decision. And I would also say, like, if you have something that's, you know, pushing 5,000 words or longer, does it all need to be on one page, or could you use that to create kind of a topic hub? Like maybe have use a landing page to create, like, here's a really general overview, and then we'll have, you know, 3, 4, 5 related articles that are, you know, 1,000 words each or 2,000 words each, but they go much more in detail on a specific subtopic there, and they all can, you know, link together and all kind of work together to really be an authoritative resource on whatever it is you're talking about. So there's no right answer for how long an article needs to be. You just kind of have to keep a few different things in mind. And if you're all right with, you know, some people who maybe aren't that interested dropping off halfway through, then, you know, have a really long article. Just, you know, make sure to use some of those other elements that we were talking about to keep those people who are interested more engaged. And then the other related question was, are longer titles better? And yeah, some of the good examples of page titles, they were longer, but that doesn't have to be true. So you can have a shorter page title. You just really want to make sure that the most important words are included in there. And sometimes that does mean there are just more words that are important. So it ends up being a little bit longer, but you can have a short page title. Probably not the answer either of you were looking for.
You can find Lindsay and I on the Global Digital team. We're happy to answer any of your questions. I saw there's an estimated read time question real quick. I think it's a great idea. It's a cue for people. And anytime you're helping the reader, that's a good thing. So thank you. I know Janelle's gonna get this up and recorded, and you'll be able to access all of our resources. But thank you all for attending, this week right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thanks everyone.